No Russell Wilson to deal with this time. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, breaking down the granddaddy of them all, the Rose Bowl. We got James Voss on the line from Autzen Zoo to help us with Oregon football. James joins us on a regular basis to talk the Ducks. James, how you doing today?
I'm doing well, Mark. Thanks for having me on. I'm very excited for the Rose Bowl.
Absolutely. This is something that I hope is not lost with all the college football playoff talk and all the ambitions and aspirations toward that end. And when I mean that, I just not talking about this particular year, but it seems to lessen each and every year. Claims by Ohio State fans last year, why are we in the Rose Bowl? Don't want to be here kind of thing. So let's, I just think it's amazing. The bowl structure in regards to the rewarding of teams that had tremendous seasons. And obviously you've got a Pac-12 championship in Oregon. Those are difficult to come by. So can you give me a barometer on the fan base and yourself in regards to just a couple of weeks ago, that college football playoff carrot was right there, but you still beat Utah. You still win the Pac-12 championship.
Yeah, I think we touched on it last week, just a little bit about the playoff being there, the ASU game, the heartbreak, and all of that. I think after watching that Utah game in the Pac-12 title, winning that in the way that Oregon did, fans are anything but upset. They saw a dominant Oregon team show up and wipe the floor with Utah, except for just a couple stretch of 7 or 8 minutes in the third quarter where Utah showed a little bit of life. But the physicality shown on the Oregon side, they were tired of hearing just how physical and how daunting that Utah defense was. Oregon, especially at the offensive line and the defensive line, really proved that they were the more physical team. They proved that they were the best team in the Pac-12 by a long shot, and the offense was productive. The offense showed life, showed some of the most life they'd shown all year, and really proved that Utah was not quite the playoff contender that I think the rest of the country kind of wrote them up as over the course of the year, especially not really catching a lot of games. I think there was a good amount of doubt coming from the rest of the country as to just how legitimate Utah was when they were in that 5 spot down there in the last game of the year. And I think they feel validated because they saw what Oregon did. But I also think that there's a something to be said about how good of a team Oregon is and was, and how much better they really were than Utah over the course of the year. Utah dominated the teams that they should have dominated, but the 2 best teams that they played all year, USC and Oregon, were losses. And they've certainly had a good run. They had a good year, but they just weren't the team that could compete at that playoff level. And I think a Pac-12 title and the Rose Bowl is something that, especially over the last 4 years, Oregon fans were deprived of in the coaching turmoil and the changeover from that Chip Kelly era, the Marcus Mariota era. The Rose Bowl is something the fans are incredibly excited about, and I'm fortunate on the Pac-12 end that the Rose Bowl is a tie-in, because I think the Rose Bowl is still that bowl game that matters no matter who's in it, especially in this playoff era. The Rose Bowl still has that prestige. The Rose Bowl has Pasadena in January and New Year's Day in the parade. And I'm actually fortunate enough to be able to head down there for my first Rose Bowl. So I'm excited about that and watch the team down there.
Yeah, that is very cool. And hopefully you have a good time down there, of course, and come away with a win. So I got to say that the Ducks made me happy just in regards to the satisfaction of my Oregon over Utah Pac-12 championship prediction back in August. So they fulfilled that for me.
Nailed
Check
it.
the box, but I got to say it came a lot, as you mentioned, it came a lot easier than I thought it would. Having picked the Ducks to win the game, I thought it was going to be a great one, and it was impressive to see you mentioned it, the physicality, because that was Utah's calling card, to see Oregon manhandle them up front. So now they get another one of those type of challenges against Wisconsin, a team that is known. That's their brand, being physical up front, both sides of the ball, especially offensively against teams' defensive fronts with the running game and Jonathan Taylor. So let's start right there with the trench warfare. And Marcus Arroyo, your offensive line coach, moving on. Oregon's known for spacing out and spreading and speed and quickness, but it's been this offensive line that's been the heart and soul of this team and one of the very best in the nation.
Yeah, you mentioned it in the open. Russell Wilson, Wisconsin, that was the 2012 Rose Bowl against Oregon. And Wisconsin was still that brand, that big, beefy, up front, we're physical, we're going to push you around. And Oregon at the time was speed. They beat them with speed. Anthony Thomas had 2 carries, 2 touchdowns, 1 for 91 yards. It was a record-setting Rose Bowl, and Oregon won a tight one in 2012. And this year, it's going to be physical on physical. And Wisconsin's very similar to Utah, at least in that narrative. I think they're probably a little bigger and they probably live up to that physicality a little more, Wisconsin does. And Zach Moss is a similar running back to Jonathan Taylor, although Jonathan Taylor is a generational running back. He has won 2 straight Doak Walker Awards. He is going to be a serious challenge for Oregon. And I think I put the number for Zach Moss in the Pac-12 title game at under 120. If the Ducks could keep him under 120, they'd have a shot. And I think a realistic number for Jonathan Taylor is probably just keep him under 180, and you'll be hoping to be in the game. I think they do it a little differently, Wisconsin does, than Utah. Tyler Huntley showed a lot of consistency and a lot of deep threat ability for Utah, but Wisconsin has Jack Cohn, who's a young quarterback. He can be electric, but he can also be a little streaky, and Oregon's seen a young quarterback like that before in Bo Nix. And I think there's something to be said about trying to take advantage of a young quarterback. It was pretty surprising that a veteran quarterback like Huntley struggled so much with Oregon's defense, but I think that'll be the first key to Oregon really putting pressure on that Wisconsin offense is making Jonathan Taylor carry the load and hopefully being able to stop that or contain that the way that they did with Zach Moss, and really expecting Jack Cohn to come out and play a full 4 quarters. He played a very strong second half in the Big Ten title game against Ohio State, and then he was stifled by Chase Young and that front for Ohio State. And so I think you'll want to see a similar approach from Oregon and Kayvon Thibodeau in especially late in the game. It's going to be a full 4-quarter game against Wisconsin, like most Rose Bowls are. And that'll be the key, I think, is outlasting Wisconsin.
Got James Voss on the line from Autzen Zoo. Please check out his work right there covering Oregon athletics, the basketball team as well. So, yeah, Wisconsin came out firing against Ohio State. They had a ton of incentive, not just to win the Big Ten championship, but having been a bit embarrassed in Columbus, took a 21-7 lead, gave up 27 straight points. Jonathan Taylor's numbers looked good. 148 on the ground, certainly had a productive first half, shut down in the second half. They only had like 35 yards of total offense. But true to Wisconsin football, they got beat because they weren't as athletic as Ohio State, weren't as strong in certain spots, but basically speed and athleticism. They didn't make mistakes. They're a team that's not going to make mistakes. They didn't give it to Ohio State with bad throws, fumbles, blown coverages, missed tackles, anything like that. They just weren't quite as good. And so obviously you're going to a team that's most likely not going to beat themselves, going to be very productive from that standpoint. Jack Cohn, you mentioned 73% passer. So certainly the offensive burden's not on his shoulders, but he was productive in his role. And Quintez Cephas, one of the best wide receivers in the Big Ten. How do you like that Oregon secondary going up against an offense that wants to throw it 20 or 22 times? So from your standpoint, obviously you would like to see it extend past that. If you can jump on them early, you take Jonathan Taylor somewhat out of the game, and make them pressured to throw it a little bit more.
Yeah, I think the ASU game was certainly one that we've talked about before, was where the Oregon secondary was really exposed. I think they really tightened it up a little bit against Oregon State, and then really tightened it up against Utah. I think especially when there are some of the younger guys out in the secondary, whether that's Michael Wright or Verone McKinley, I think the real key is playing very smart. So if there was a play where against Utah where Michael Wright was beat on a double move and he recovered pretty well, but he committed a pass interference that very much like that's something you'll take 10 times out of 10. Take the pass interference. Don't let them beat you deep on a double move like Arizona State did a bunch. And Cephas, I think, is a speedy wide receiver. He's someone that you could definitely see trying that. I'm sure Wisconsin will look at the tape and say that that's where some of the younger corners are for Oregon are exposed a little bit. But I think they've certainly tightened up. Andy Avalos has tightened up the corners, Diamador Lenore, Thomas Graham Jr., and I think you'll definitely see a more physical team. Brady Breeze, who's a safety, who hasn't been a solid starter. He's really been special teams. He really showed out in the Pac-12 title game, looking like John Boyette, I think Kirk Herbstreit mentioned. And I think John Boyette shined in that Rose Bowl, made a couple of huge tackles down there at the end. I think the physicality matching that with the secondary, Brady Breeze is going to be flying around. He's a kid from Oregon, a kid from Portland. He's been dreaming of this, and it's his Rose Bowl. And that's something to be said for all these guys, especially the guys who stuck around from 4 wins 4 years ago. And now they're here, like Justin Herbert and Troy Dye. They're all going to be highly motivated. And I think you're going to see a month's worth of preparation for that Oregon defense. And Andy Avalos is going to be huge for the way that they're going to be able to handle Wisconsin.
Brady Breeze, 51 tackles on the season, rates 5th on the team, couple interceptions. You mentioned Troy Dye, obviously the leader on defense from a production standpoint, 9.5 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks, leads the team in tackles with 75. Got to see a bit of his personality right after the Pac-12 championship game at midfield. He's quite a character.
Absolutely. Like I said, he's been a starter since his freshman year. He's been in the trenches for good and for bad of Oregon football, and he is soaking up this year. He dances to shout. He leads the whole student section, the whole stadium in Animal House's shout in between the 3rd and 4th quarters, dancing, getting up on the Jumbotron after the Washington game, whether it was good or bad. He was doing snow angels in the W. He was throwing the W upside down and celebrating, and he is the spirit of this defense, especially, but he's certainly the spirit of the fan base. Really, just a reminder that this is something to soak in, especially like you said, the playoff has all this drama behind it, and the Rose Bowl could understandably lose a little bit of its charm, but Troy Dye is that youthful energy, and you literally see it in that post-game interview with Troy Dye on one side celebrating, making faces, holding the hat, and then you see that composure of Justin Herbert. They are the yin and the yang, but they have both been starters from the get-go, right, in Oregon football, and through so much coaching changes, so much turmoil. I think they're a perfect microcosm of this senior class especially, but just how far Oregon has come since that really tough 4-8 year in 2016.
James, you dropped the name. I can't believe I went like 15 minutes of a preview of the Rose Bowl with Oregon involved without mentioning the name Justin Herbert. So if you can give us the quick take on the Justin Herbert offense against Wisconsin's defense. And you mentioned a few times the weight of the Rose Bowl being different than the other bowl games outside the playoff. Justin Herbert, 32 touchdowns, 5 picks, maybe the number 1 draft pick, everything to lose. Is he going to miss the Rose Bowl? No. Of course not.
Yeah, there's not a chance. He's as it's been said a ton of times, he grew up in Eugene, grew up a Duck fan, family all played for Oregon. There's former players throughout his lineage, and his younger brother, Patrick Herbert, is a freshman tight end. He's pretty much going to be a redshirt, but he hasn't. He's come into, I think, one game this year, so he is eligible if they want to throw him out there to give them both a Rose Bowl connection. I think that would be something to look out for. It might be far-fetched, but I wouldn't put it past Cristobal if the situation were to come up, especially because of the injuries at the tight end position. But yeah, Justin, there's not enough, I don't think, that can be said about what Justin Herbert has done for this program. There's not enough that can be said about how he values, or where he puts his value. His value has not been, I'm going to get mine, I'm going to build myself up for the draft. His value has been getting his education. He just won the Campbell Trophy, which is presented in New York, and it's mostly for academics. Performance is part of it, but it's mostly for achievement in academics. They refer to it as the academic Heisman. He's achieved far greater than just what has been put on the field, and there's plenty of hype about his physicality, and there's plenty of hype about all of his NFL quarterback future, but his passion has been coming back to the U of O, soaking in these best years of his life in Eugene, and he has proven it time and time again that he is committed to this team. He was choking up a little bit there at the end of that Pac-12 title game post-game interview, and you can tell that it really means a lot to him to try to bring this Rose Bowl back to Eugene, and you're gonna really see him shine. I don't think he's worried about how he's gonna be looked towards the recruiters or all the scouts that are gonna be there. He's going to be full, how can I win this game? How can I be on the podium at the end of this? And I think that's just a testament to who he has always been since he stepped on campus.
Yeah, for everything I've seen and read about Justin Herbert and watching him play for several seasons, I had not run across that particular portion of his life, and that's great to hear, and certainly very admirable, and a credit to himself and his family, his team, the entire institution there at Oregon, for the family to be that dedicated and loyal to the university, and to see it play out on the field, and to see that he's able to get the job done at an exemplary rate off the field is credit again to him. James Voss, Autzen Zoo, we encourage you to get over there. He's got to get to a basketball game. The Ducks are playing mighty Michigan, so that should be an interesting one between the Pac-12 and the Big Ten on the hard floor. So, James, we appreciate you stopping by.
Thank you very much, Mark. Go Ducks.